Metal Gear Solid on the original PlayStation. I'll never forget when this released in late 1998. I had to go back even several years for when my fandom actually started, because I actually had the original Metal Gear on the original Nintendo. And I'll never forget it because I was a fan of Terminator growing up. Like, I love the Terminator movies, and still do, by the way. And I remember on the cover of Metal Gear back on the NES, there was an animated picture of Kyle Reese. And I'm thinking, like, what in the world? Why is this not called Terminator if there's a picture of Kyle Reese on this cover? And that's when immediately I just got hooked. Like, thinking that it was going to be a Terminator-based game, which I was wrong about that. Completely different game. But nonetheless, I still really enjoyed the game. I really dug it. Really dug it. Thought it was really different from everything else I was playing at the time. And fast forward to the late 90s, and I remember when Metal Gear Solid was announced coming to Sony PlayStation. And I was there opening week to get my copy of it. And I'll never forget that double case, 2 CDs in it, and was just blown away immediately. Just absolutely blown away, and thought that I was going to end up loving it. And I did. And I did immediately. I talked about my last video, GoldenEye 007, and how revolutionary it was for the first person shooter genre. And this is no different as far as being revolutionary for the stealth genre. This was revolutionary. And at that time, there was no other games that was doing what Metal Gear Solid had done. It just, again, it moved the needle. It moved the needle. It shifted the paradigm and introduced something that was unprecedented, quite frankly. And just really blew me away amongst other people. I mean, it's a critically acclaimed game. It's legendary every which way. There's no ifs, ands, or but about that. I mean, obviously, releasing multiple sequels that followed for the past two and a half decades really tells that story. And when I think about Metal Gear Solid 1, if I'm being honest with you, I was like, I'm a fan of all the games across the board, but my favorite will always be the original, like, hands down. The Shadow Moses incident, all the distinctive characters, enemies, bosses, felt so different from each other, but very connected. And it's just a special game. It's just one of those special games. And I think a lot of people do feel that way. At least they did more closer in the early 2000s. Now that the game looks very dated and it looks almost unplayable, even though it's not. I actually just played through the game this past year, and really enjoyed it from a nostalgia standpoint. But I can understand how a lot of people would have a difficulty playing all the way through it, who want to see updated visuals. But at the end of the day, though, the game is just classic. It's just a classic, and that's how I look at it. And I'll say this: if it wasn't for Metal Gear Solid, there would never be a Splinter Cell. And I'll stand on that. If it wasn't for Metal Gear Solid, there would never be a Splinter Cell. And I eventually became a fan of Splinter Cell as well. Not right off the bat. I would say maybe a few years in, after a couple of games had released. The first one I played was Pandora Tomorrow, and immediately loved that game. I remember actually getting it on PS2 because I didn't have an Xbox, and still enjoyed it, even though the superior game was in fact on Microsoft's console. But it took me a while to come around, but I did. And the Splinter Cell games, much like the Metal Gear games, is something that I still play to this day, occasionally on a yearly basis. And I really just, I would say the stealth genre is my favorite genre when it comes to video games. Like, that's how huge of an impact Metal Gear Solid had on me. And I mentioned earlier that when it comes to the stealth genre, well, yeah, excuse me, stealth games as a whole, they're not going to, it's going to be a special group of gamers that really take a liking to it, because everybody's not going to like the stealth. Not everybody's not going to have the patience to play it. And that's one thing that's interesting about it. And that's what, into my opinion, makes it stand out from the crowd, opposed to just going into a room and shooting everybody that moves like a first person shooter, when that's not how the game is supposed to be played. It's like you're sneaking, you're taking dudes out quietly and sometimes unannounced, to where you go through an entire area, you don't bother any enemies, and you go unnoticed for the whole chapter or the scene, the level, whatever the case may be. Yeah, but there's so many different ways I can talk about Metal Gear Solid, and there's so many things I can go on, but this is just about me giving the game its flowers, and how much it just means to me as a gamer. Just one of those fond memories that I have in my head, much like I talked about with GoldenEye. It's just one of those special games, man, that was just that just sticks with me rent free, like that I just always will be so fond of. And it's not close. The sequels, as great as they are, they just didn't do for me what the original did, even though they were great games there in their own right. I would say the third game, Snake Eater, is a close second of all the Metal Gear games that came out. The remake that came out last year is absolutely phenomenal. It's great. I've beaten it probably 3-4 times. But I will always have a special fondness for Shadow Moses MGS1. Like, I will always have a special fondness. But I would like to know what you guys think. I mentioned Splinter Cell. I will also go on record to say Hitman is another game, another stealth series that, if it wasn't for Metal Gear Solid, I don't believe that would exist. And again, I'm a fan of Hitman. I love the Hitman series. But they all are not my first choice when it comes to stealth games. If my first choice will always be MGS, hands down. Let me know what you guys think. I actually would like to know here, when it comes to stealth games, what you prefer. If you have a choice, if you love them equally or one more than the other. But other than that, I will see you on the next video.